Blood smeared faintly across the beige armrest. A thin, accidental streak that most passengers would have missed if not for the sudden shift in atmosphere. The cabin of Flight L-88 had been calm only seconds earlier. Soft hum of ventilation, quiet conversations, overhead bins clicking shut. But everything stiffened the moment two security officers rushed through the forward entryway. Their uniforms cut across the aisle like a warning sign. "Who struck the boy in seat 2A?" one of the officers demanded. His tone wasn't loud, but it landed heavy enough to silence a few conversations mid-sentence. Phones lifted instantly. Half the front cabin reacted the same way, recording before understanding, capturing before processing. The flight attendant standing closest to the child, a woman in her early 50s named Dara Crane, quickly stepped back as though she could distance herself from the accusation by physically retreating. She pressed a hand against her uniform as if smoothing a wrinkle would erase the tension in the air. What she didn't know, what nearly everyone on the aircraft didn't know, was that the 10-year-old boy she had just confronted was no ordinary minor. His name was Mikkel Edison, and although he appeared quiet, soft-spoken, and easy to overlook, he carried a clearance level that most employees at Luma Air had never heard of. Mikkel wasn't dangerous, he wasn't disruptive, but he was protected legally, institutionally, and operationally under a classification that triggered high-level monitoring the moment anything went wrong. And something had gone wrong. A slap, a torn document, a dismissive tone, and now a flight being held on the ground longer than the crew expected. But for now, the other passengers only saw what was in front of them, a boy sitting still in a cream leather first-class seat, not crying, not speaking, not reacting. His calm only made the scene feel heavier. At gate 47 billion in Seattle, Mikkel had sat alone without shifting much. Airports could be overwhelming for kids, bright signs, endless announcements, people rushing in every direction. But Mikkel processed noise differently. He carried a quiet inside him that didn't break under pressure. He liked predictability, steady patterns, soft sounds that wrapped around him gently. His red hoodie was neatly zipped, his sneakers spotless, his posture composed. People underestimated children like him. They assumed silence meant confusion or timidity. They didn't realize how closely he was observing them, reading tone, studying behavior, noting details. His boarding pass had been scanned at the private security terminal earlier. Seat 2, a Flight L-88 clearance. Level Alpha, the green notification on his wristband had pulsed once, confirming everything was in order. His mother's words replayed in his mind. "People may see you before they see your seat. Don't let that unsettle you. You don't need to explain yourself to anyone. Just exist." When boarding began, Mikkel approached the gate agent quietly, offering his pass with a small, polite nod. The woman smiled at him, assuming he was traveling alone for the first time. "Are you okay getting to your seat by yourself?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," he replied. She scanned the pass, heard the confirmation beep, and stepped aside. But the man in line behind him, a sharply dressed, clean-cut individual in his 50s, took note of the exchange. He didn't stare, didn't speak, just observed with the kind of attention adults rarely gave children. That man was Theo Price, though no one knew his role yet. Mikkel entered the aircraft and was greeted by Amara Calder, a junior flight attendant with a warm demeanor. "Welcome aboard," she said. He thanked her and found his seat easily. 2A window, first class. The cabin had that specific sterile scent he recognized from previous flights with his mother, clean leather, faint lavender, filtered air. He settled in, placing his duffel under the seat ahead. The piece lasted less than 2 minutes. A sharp voice cut through the soft noise of boarding. "Excuse me, are you sure you're meant to sit here?" Mikkel looked up. Dara Crane, the lead attendant, stood above him. Her hair was tightly pinned, her posture rigid, her expression carefully neutral but tinted with something unwelcoming. "Yes, ma'am," he answered. "This is my seat." "This is first class," she repeated slowly, as if clarifying something a child couldn't possibly understand. "I know," Mikkel said evenly. "My mother booked it." She studied him, his clothes, his age, his skin tone, his quiet confidence, with an expression that wasn't curiosity. It was judgment dressed as protocol. "Well, just stay put. There may be a seat mix-up for unaccompanied minors." The man from the gate, Theo Price, had taken his seat in 3C behind Mikkel. He lowered his newspaper just enough to observe. Across the aisle, an older woman, Mrs. Loretta Rowe, watched with slight disapproval. She didn't intervene yet, but her eyes narrowed. She'd seen this type of interaction before. Minutes passed. More passengers entered. The plane grew louder. Then Dara returned, face tight, holding a clipboard. "You're not listed as an unaccompanied minor," she said stiffly. Mikkel reached into his duffel calmly and produced a sealed letter with an embossed insignia. "My mom asked me to show this if anyone needed confirmation." Dara took one glance, no more than 2 seconds, before tearing it in half. The sound cut through Mikkel more sharply than the action itself. The cabin grew still just slightly like the pause before a storm. He didn't cry, he didn't protest, he simply watched the pieces fall. "Stand up," Dara instructed. "You'll be relocated." It was then that Mrs. Rowe lifted her phone and began recording. And it was then, too, that Mikkel's wristband buzzed, a silent alert confirming that whatever he chose next would not go unnoticed. The security officers scanned the cabin. No one spoke. Every passenger watching could sense the imbalance, the uneasy quiet following something that should never have occurred. Mikkel didn't defend himself. He didn't need to. His stillness said enough. His clearance said more. And in the next few minutes, everything, from the flight's departure to the careers of those involved, would begin shifting, quietly but irrevocably. The presence of security in the cabin should have calmed the tension, but it did the opposite. The air felt tighter, as though everyone had become acutely aware that something significant, far beyond a seating dispute, was unfolding. Passengers adjusted themselves in their seats, some sitting taller, some shrinking slightly, all waiting to see what the officers would do next. But the officers didn't speak immediately. They scanned the environment, noting every detail. The boy's steady posture, the thin smear of blood, the torn paper on the tray table, and the way the lead attendant stood rigidly several steps away, as if distance alone could protect her. Mikkel Edison hadn't moved since their arrival. His hands rested calmly in his lap, his face turned slightly toward the window, though he wasn't looking at anything outside. He was simply waiting. His restraint felt almost unnatural for a child, which only deepened the sense that something larger operated beneath the surface. The taller officer Raymond stepped forward. His tone softened when he spoke to Mikkel, but his posture remained formal. "Young man, are you injured?" he asked quietly. Mikkel blinked once. "I'm okay." It was the same kind of answer children gave when they weren't okay at all but didn't want to make things worse. Yet his voice held no tremor, no fear, only clarity. Raymond exchanged a glance with his partner. They recognized that kind of composure. It belonged to people trained not to react impulsively. But a child seldom possessed it naturally. Passengers filmed openly now, no longer hiding their devices. They sensed this was no ordinary airline mishap. Something in Mikkel's presence, in the controlled responses of the officers, hinted at institutional forces none of them understood. Dara Crane stepped forward, attempting to reclaim authority. "Officers, I assure you, we're handling a simple procedural issue here. The boy refused to comply with seating guidelines, and The officer held up a hand, a polite but firm gesture that cut her sentence in half. "Ma'am, we will speak with you shortly. For now, we need to assess the situation independently." Her jaw tightened. She wasn't used to being dismissed, not by passengers, not by crew, and certainly not by ground security. But she stepped back anyway, folding her arms tightly, her eyes fixed on Mikkel with a lingering mix of frustration and something more complicated, fear of how this might turn against her. Behind her, junior attendant Amara Calder watched with her hands clasped in front of her. She looked conflicted, her expression betraying that she had noticed details Dara had ignored. She had seen the clean scan of Mikkel's boarding pass. She had seen how calmly he boarded. She had seen how he tried to offer documentation instead of arguing. A subtle guilt rested on her shoulders, but she wasn't sure yet if speaking up would help or worsen the situation. Theo Price remained in his seat in 3C, calm, unreadable. His eyes flicked briefly toward Mikkel's wristband as the softest vibration pulsed again beneath the boy's sleeve. A signal had been sent. Theo knew what that meant. The hold on the flight was no mistake. The delay wasn't caused by congestion or weather or a late passenger. It had been triggered intentionally from Mikkel himself. The boy lowered his hand slightly as though adjusting his sleeve, but Theo caught the movement. Level Alpha miners were taught not to escalate unless necessary. For him to send a second signal meant he judged the situation severe, not emotionally but procedurally. Theo's fingers tapped lightly on the side of his seat, activating a secure listening channel. He needed no further confirmation. The child had initiated an internal review. A soft chime echoed through the cabin, the kind that usually preceded a captain's announcement. Passengers paused, anticipating instructions. Instead, the plane remained eerily still. The engines hummed quietly, but nothing moved. The jet bridge hadn't detached. The ground crew outside looked unsettled, whispering into radios. Inside the cockpit, the captain reviewed a private message for the fourth time. It came through a restricted channel, tagged with a clearance code he had never encountered in his 17-year career. He glanced toward the co-pilot, who was equally confused but not dismissive. "This can't be a mistake," the co-pilot said. "The verification stamp is corporate level." "Which makes this bigger than a seating dispute," the captain replied. "Much bigger." They had been instructed not to depart, not to taxi, not to close the cabin door. A freeze directive wasn't issued lightly. When it appeared, operations stopped until the issue was cleared, and the issue, according to the encrypted message, involved passenger Mikkel Edison. In the cabin, no one else knew these details, but everyone sensed the shift. The quiet wasn't ordinary anymore. It was waiting for something. Amara Calder stepped closer to Dara, lowering her voice. "I think we should pause, Dara." His file, it flagged something unusual. Dara shot her a sharp look. "Do not undermine my authority on my flight. It's a system error, nothing more." "It didn't look like an error," Amara whispered. "There was an advisory code I've never—" "Enough," Dara hissed. "The boy is out of place. That's the beginning and end of it." But even as she said the words, her certainty faltered. Not because she doubted herself, but because she now sensed others doubted her. Mikkel remained still. He had learned early that people underestimated silence. They filled it with their own assumptions, their own frustrations, their own defensiveness. They revealed themselves in how they reacted to it, so he let the silence expand around him. Mrs. Loretta Rowe leaned forward from across the aisle. She murmured softly, "You're doing very well, sweetheart." It wasn't patronizing. It wasn't performative. It was genuine acknowledgement. Mikkel gave a small nod, not to please her, but because he recognized sincerity when he heard it. The teenage girl in row 5 whispered loudly to her friend, "I got the video." You can hear her snap at him, "I'm posting it." Her friend shook her head. "This is going viral before we even take off." And she was right. The moment she pressed upload, the digital world would begin spinning faster than anyone in first class realized. At the front of the cabin, Dara Crane replayed the slap in her mind, not as an admission of guilt, but as justification. She had felt disrespected. She had assumed he was lying. She had expected gratitude when she offered to move him instead of confrontation. Her entire worldview framed her actions as reasonable. But the world watching through phone cameras would not see what she saw. They would see only a boy being dismissed, a document being torn, authority being misused. Officer Raymond stepped forward again. "Young man, do you feel unsafe?" Mikkel's voice, when it came, was steady. "I just want to sit where I'm supposed to sit." The officer nodded slowly. "And you have done nothing wrong." That acknowledgement, simple as it was, changed the tone. A young couple in the middle of the cabin exchanged glances. A businessman in 1C shifted as though reevaluating the situation. People who had been neutral began leaning quietly toward the child. Theo Price finally spoke, his voice calm, directed at no one in particular. "He is exactly where he was assigned to be." Dara turned sharply. "Sir, you have no authority to intervene." But Theo didn't look at her. He looked at Officer Raymond, and the officer seemed to recognize him, not personally but professionally. The black matte badge partially visible inside Theo's jacket pocket was enough. Something clicked then. The officer straightened slightly. "We will be verifying everything formally," he said. "Until then, the passenger is to remain in his assigned seat." Dara opened her mouth, but her voice failed her. For the first time, she sensed she was no longer the highest-ranking authority in the room, and the realization rattled her. Amara watched quietly, her jaw tightening. She was beginning to understand the magnitude of this moment and the consequences that would follow. Mikkel lowered his gaze to the torn remnants of the letter on the tray table. He didn't try to reconstruct it. He simply rested his hand beside it, steady and deliberate as though grounding himself. His wristband pulsed again. Signal received, protocol escalation acknowledged. Nothing in his expression changed, but the entire trajectory of the flight had already shifted. And soon, the world outside the plane would shift with it. The cabin had become a study in contrast, quiet, but not calm. Every person aboard Flight L-88 felt the tension deepen as minutes ticked by without movement. The engines continued their low hum, a reminder that the plane was fully powered and ready for departure, yet grounded by an invisible decision made far above the authority of the crew. Mikkel Edison remained exactly as he had been. Seated upright, hands resting lightly on his lap, gaze lowered, not in submission but in measured composure. His stillness unsettled Dara Crane more than any outburst could have. Children reacted, Everyone knew that. They cried, argued, protested, clung to their bags or their seats when they felt wronged. But Mikkel had done none of that. He had absorbed the humiliation without flinching, and somehow that made him harder to dismiss. Officer Raymond and his partner stepped aside to review notes quietly, glancing periodically toward Mikkel, as if ensuring his safety wasn't momentarily compromised. Their presence near the front of the cabin served as a silent barrier between him and anything else that might escalate. The attendants hovered awkwardly in the galley. Amara Calder stood closest to the curtain that separated them from passengers. Her fingers trembled slightly around the edge of her service tablet, which still displayed a message she had never seen before. An alert stamped with a gold insignia and a clearance level usually associated with diplomatic personnel. It hadn't been a system glitch. She knew that now. Beside her, Dara Crane watched the passengers with a tightening grip on her clipboard. Her face had taken on a strained stiffness, pride, confusion, and an undercurrent of defensiveness pushing through in waves. She had always believed that order and obedience kept flights running smoothly. A challenge to that authority, especially from a child, felt like disrespect. But as she scanned the faces around her, she sensed the shift. She no longer had the silent approval of the cabin. The man in 3C, Theo Price, sat with one leg crossed, posture relaxed, expression unreadable. But there was a certainty in his demeanor, the kind of quiet assurance possessed only by people who knew exactly what was happening and exactly what would happen next. And he was watching Mikkel closely. Not protectively, but knowingly. Every subtle move Mikkel made, every tap of the wristband, every pause before responding, told Theo the escalation had reached a point where he might need to intervene in an official capacity. He just hadn't decided when. A few rows back, the teenage girl who had recorded the earlier confrontation whispered excitedly as her phone vibrated nonstop. "It hit 100,000 views," she murmured. "And climbing fast," her friend leaned over. "They're asking for the kid's name." The girl shook her head. "I didn't post that, that's not my place." But the internet didn't need her assistance. Someone else who recognized the last name, Edison, had already made the connection. Mrs. Loretta Rowe watched Mikkel with a complex expression, pride mixed with worry. She recognized the quiet strength in him, but she also recognized the cost of such strength in a world that often punished children for composure instead of rewarding it. "You're handling this better than most adults would," she said softly, leaning across the aisle. Mikkel gave a tiny nod but did not look up. He didn't need to. Her words landed gently, and he acknowledged them in the way he knew how. Officer Raymond approached again, kneeling slightly to meet Mikkel's height. "Son, I need to confirm something with you," he said in a tone carefully measured for reassurance. "Did the flight attendant make physical contact with you?" Mikkel paused. He didn't enjoy describing things that hurt him out loud. It made them heavier, more real. But he also understood that truth carried weight, and silence could be mistakenly interpreted as acceptance. "Yes," he said quietly. "She did." Raymond's expression darkened. Not with anger, officers were trained not to react emotionally, but with concern sharpened into purpose. He stood, nodded once, and stepped away toward the front of the plane. Dara stiffened. Her shoulders lifted slightly as if bracing for impact. Amara closed her eyes for a brief moment. Theo Price tapped a silent command on the discreet device hidden beneath his jacket. The audio feed captured everything. Mikkel's words, Raymond's question, the collective silence afterward. The recording was time-stamped, encrypted, and relayed to the Edison Foundation's incident team. A chime sounded from the cockpit. The captain emerged, expression serious but not panicked. He approached the security officers first. "Updates?" he asked. "We need to speak privately," Raymond replied. The captain nodded. His eyes moved toward Mikkel, lingering longer than necessary, not out of suspicion but out of recognition. Captains reviewed passenger lists before departure, especially first-class passengers. The notation beside Mikkel's name hadn't made sense earlier. It made sense now. The cockpit door closed behind them. The cabin returned to its uneasy stillness. Passengers exchanged quiet whispers. "What's happening? Why aren't we moving? Is the flight canceled? Who is the boy?" But no one dared speak to Mikkel directly. Dara finally broke. She stepped toward him, her voice lowered but trembling with restrained irritation. "You need to understand," she said. "You cannot just—" "Ma'am," Theo Price's voice cut through the air like a clean blade. It wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. Dara turned to him instinctively, something in the tone forcing her to pause. Theo stood now, adjusting his jacket calmly. "You will not address him again until this matter is formally resolved," he said. Dara's eyes narrowed. And who exactly are you to make that determination? Theo reached into his jacket and produced a small matte black credential card. No logo, only a silver clearance seal that shimmered under the cabin lights. He didn't hand it to her, he simply held it where she could see. Her breath faltered. Passengers craned their necks. Amara's eyes widened. Officer Raymond, returning at that moment, saw the card and exhaled slowly, as if that single visual confirmation answered every lingering question. Theo continued, "The child is not to be moved, questioned, or handled further. Any additional contact will be considered interference with a protected individual." Dara's confidence collapsed in an instant. Anger remained in her posture, but the power behind it had evaporated. "I didn't know," she whispered, as though ignorance could soften consequence. Theo's expression didn't shift. "You didn't need to know. You only needed to treat him appropriately." Mikkel's eyes lowered again. He wasn't enjoying the spectacle, not the fear in Dara's voice, not the attention, not the gathering storm of consequence. He simply wanted to exist without being questioned for existing. But now the storm would follow its own momentum. The captain re-emerged, looking even more grave than before. He stepped toward Dara. "Miss Crane," he said, "I need you at the front, now." Her steps were heavy as she walked past Mikkel. Her gaze flicked to him briefly, an expression filled with something conflicting. Defensiveness, disbelief, and unmistakably regret she didn't yet know how to voice. The cabin door closed behind her and the captain. Amara Calder approached Mikkel quietly. She didn't sit, she didn't kneel. She simply stood at a respectful distance. "I'm sorry," she said softly, almost too softly for anyone else to hear. Mikkel nodded once. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it wasn't rejection either. Theo Price watched the exchange and then returned to his seat, knowing that soon things would escalate far beyond the cabin. Mikkel tapped his wristband once more under the tray table. Protocol escalation complete. External review activated. Outside, the jet bridge reattached itself slowly. Something was coming, something no one on the crew was prepared for. The jet bridge reconnecting to the aircraft sent a quiet ripple of unease through the entire front cabin. Passengers exchanged glances, confused, curious, unsettled. A jet bridge only returned when something serious prevented a flight from departing. Weather didn't cause this. Air traffic delays didn't cause this. This was deliberate. Inside the plane, the captain's voice did not return over the intercom. He wasn't making announcements anymore. Whatever discussions were happening behind the cockpit door were not meant for the passengers, and that silence only made the atmosphere heavier. Dara Crane stood rigidly near the galley, arms crossed so tightly her knuckles whitened. She had always been confident, always believed in rules, her interpretation of them at least. But the captain had confronted her with a firm, unmistakable tone. He did not argue. He did not negotiate. He simply stated that an official inquiry was underway, that operations had been notified, and that she was to remain in the front until further instruction. She wasn't removed yet, but the threat hovered over her like a slowly lowering ceiling. She glanced back at Mikkel Edison. He wasn't looking at her. He wasn't looking at anyone. He sat quietly in 2A, hands folded neatly on his lap. His face, though calm, carried the faint swelling on his cheek where the slap had landed. In the dim cabin lighting, it wasn't immediately noticeable, but Dara saw it now, saw what she had done, and something inside her tightened sharply. Regret was creeping in, but it collided with her pride, forming a painful mix that left her unable to step forward or step away. Amara Calder kept her distance, fiddling with her tablet. She wasn't involved, but she wasn't innocent either. She had seen the tension building earlier, she had sensed it. And still, she had stayed silent because silence felt safer at the time. Now that decision weighed on her. Theo Price watched everything with a calm patience. He knew this stage, the waiting phase, was where people revealed their true selves. Some collapsed under the pressure, some tried to fight it. And some, like the boy in 2A, simply stayed still and let the truth unfold. Officer Raymond returned from the cockpit, his expression controlled but clearly changed. He approached the first row, pausing to gather everyone's attention with a quiet but authoritative presence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "there will be a short delay. Please remain in your seats. Additional personnel will be boarding shortly." Passengers murmured anxiously. "Additional personnel?" a businessman in 1C asked. "What does that mean?" Raymond didn't answer. He simply stepped aside and took position near the front, hands folded behind his back. The cabin fell back into silence. In row 5, the teenage girl whispered to her friend, "This is already trending. People are asking if the airline is trying to cover it up." Her friend looked down at her phone. One clip has 500,000 views. It's everywhere now. Mrs. Loretta Rowe, still seated across from Mikkel, sighed softly. People don't realize how quickly something small turns into something enormous, she said aloud, not to anyone specific. Sometimes one moment is all it takes. Her eyes lingered on Mikkel with a mixture of sadness and admiration. Then footsteps approached from the jet bridge. Slow, steady, purposeful. 3 individuals boarded, 2 in uniform, 1 in a charcoal gray suit with a badge clipped to his belt. They weren't TSA and they weren't flight crew. They carried the distinctive bearing of people accustomed to internal investigations and crisis response. Luma Air Corporate Security. The man in the suit scanned the cabin with a measured gaze. "My name is Anderson," he announced. "We're here to speak with the crew and assess the situation before this aircraft can be cleared for departure." Passengers shifted, whispering. Some recorded discreetly. Dara Crane inhaled sharply. She had dealt with supervisors. She had dealt with audits. But corporate security? That was a different level. She tried to maintain composure, but her breathing betrayed her. Amara stepped slightly behind her, as though instinctively seeking distance. Officer Raymond spoke quietly to Anderson, then pointed toward Mikkel. Anderson's gaze followed. His expression changed almost imperceptibly, but Theo Price noticed. Professionals recognized one another. Anderson knew who Mikkel was, not personally, but institutionally. His name carried a classification some employees only heard about during annual compliance training. He approached Mikkel slowly, lowering himself to a level that communicated respect rather than authority. "Mr. Edison," he said gently, "are you comfortable? Is there anything you need?" Mikkel looked at him, then down at his hands. He shook his head. "I'm okay." But Anderson didn't take that at face value. "I'm going to ask you something important," he said. "Do you feel safe continuing on this aircraft?" The question wasn't procedural, it was decisive. If Mikkel said no, the flight would be canceled. No discussion. No appeal. The airline's rules demanded it. Mikkel hesitated not because he was confused, but because he understood the weight behind the answer. He wasn't used to being asked if he felt safe. He was used to being told he was safe. But feeling safe? That was different. He looked briefly toward Theo. Theo gave a small nod, permission to answer honestly. Finally, Mikkel said, "I just want to sit where I'm supposed to sit." Anderson didn't smile, but his expression softened. "Thank you, that's clear." He stood and turned to the crew. "Miss Crane," he said, "step forward." Dara's pulse spiked. She obeyed reluctantly. Anderson's voice remained professional but firm. "We have reviewed initial footage submitted by passengers, and we will be extracting the aircraft's internal logs and camera feeds. Until the investigation is complete, you are relieved of all in-flight duties." Her breath caught. I was following procedure." "Procedure," Anderson repeated, "does not include physical force without cause, nor does it permit the destruction of passenger documentation." Passengers murmured loudly now. "She tore his letter. She hit him. That's unbelievable." Phones lifted again, catching reactions, expressions, tension. Dara's posture collapsed just slightly. "I didn't know who he was," she whispered. Anderson's eyes hardened. "You didn't need to know who he was. You only needed to follow protocol." Her eyes dropped, the weight of her mistake fully settling over her. The investigation team stepped aside, preparing additional paperwork. Dara Crane stood frozen, unable to retreat and unable to justify herself any further. Theo Price watched quietly. He wasn't vindictive. He didn't take pleasure in seeing her unravel. But accountability mattered, and this time it was unavoidable. Mrs. Rowe leaned slightly forward in her seat. She whispered, "Some lessons are learned too late." Mikkel listened, but he didn't react. His stillness was no longer simply composure. It was clarity, an understanding that everything happening now was beyond his control, beyond his intention, yet rooted in the moment he had chosen not to shrink. Theo leaned toward him just slightly. "Your mother has been notified," he said quietly. "She's already moving toward corporate headquarters." Mikkel swallowed. His chest tightened not with fear, but with anticipation. His mother didn't yell, she didn't storm into rooms. She spoke with calm precision that unnerved people far more than raised voices could. The plane remained still on the tarmac, jet bridge connected, security present, passengers silent. Crew shaken, flight frozen in a moment that would soon be broadcast far beyond the cabin walls. A quiet vibration buzzed on Mikkel's wrist. External command acknowledged. Incident report forwarded. Secondary protocol engaged. Whatever was about to happen next would push the situation beyond the aircraft. The stillness inside the cabin was suffocating, not because of noise, but because of what replaced it. Authority had shifted. Control had shifted. Even the air felt different, as though everyone aboard could sense that the next moments would determine the full weight of what had happened. Mikkel Edison sat quietly in 2A, small hands folded neatly, his posture straight but not rigid. His silence wasn't fear. It wasn't shock. It was something older, deeper, learned resilience shaped by years of watching adults underestimate him. He had become an expert in absorbing tension without letting it break him. The corporate security team conferred in hushed tones near the front. Officer Raymond reviewed passenger-recorded footage with a seriousness that suggested the matter had already escalated far beyond a routine airline incident. Anderson, the lead investigator, remained near Mikkel, not hovering, but present enough to make it clear the airline now recognized its responsibility to protect him. Meanwhile, Dara Crane stood off to the side, eyes darting between Mikkel, the investigators, and the passengers who whispered openly. Her uniform still looked immaculate, crisp, polished, perfectly assembled, but her composure was unraveling thread by thread. For decades she had worked these aisles with confident authority. Now, in less than an hour, that authority had collapsed. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was strained. "I didn't realize," she murmured. I thought." But no one prompted her to continue, and no one reassured her. The silence around her was not understanding, it was consequence. In row 3, Theo Price watched calmly, hands resting lightly on his knees. His quiet observance carried a subtle warning. The more the crew misstepped, the larger the response would become. He wasn't a bodyguard. He wasn't a hired witness. He was the bridge between what had happened on the aircraft and the legal storm forming beyond it. He leaned slightly forward. "Mikkel," he said softly, "if you need a moment or a break, I can ask them to pause everything." Mikkel shook his head. "I'm okay," Theo believed him. Even so, he kept an eye on the swelling on the boy's cheek, faint but visible under cabin lights. The world outside the plane had already seen it. That alone would ignite outrage. Passengers knew it, too. The teenage girl in row 5 watched her screen, her eyes widening as she scrolled through comments. "People are furious," she whispered to her friend. "Look, politicians are already reposting it." Her friend leaned closer. "And celebrity accounts. It jumped to 2 million views." A businessman several rows ahead overheard. "They're calling for the airline to issue an apology immediately," he murmured. "This is going to be national news within hours." Mrs. Loretta Rowe glanced at them, her tone thoughtful rather than excited. "These things spiral quickly," she said quietly, "especially when strangers recognize truths people try to hide." She looked back at Mikkel. "He handled himself better than most adults would." The girl nodded. "He deserves better than this." Mrs. Rowe agreed with a soft exhale. Back in the galley, Amara Calder stood stiffly, hands clasped, her tablet still showing the flagged clearance code beside Mikkel's name. She replayed her earlier silence over and over in her mind. She wished she had said something sooner, before things escalated. Before Dara took over the situation with the force of someone who believed she was unquestionably right. When Anderson noticed her lingering at the galley entrance, he approached with a calm but direct tone. "Miss Calder," she straightened immediately. "Yes, sir." "I need a statement from you later," Anderson said. "But right now I need you to assist me by confirming details from your passenger log." She nodded, grateful to be given something productive to do. "Of course," he lowered his voice. "You saw his boarding scan. You saw that it cleared?" "Yes," she said quietly, "without issue." "And did he cause any disruption before the incident?" "No, sir," she replied. "He boarded calmly, he was polite. He went straight to his seat." Her voice caught slightly at the end. Anderson observed her for half a beat. "Thank you, honesty is important right now." She nodded again, understanding the unspoken implication. Honesty might be the only thing separating her from Dara's fate. Speaking of Dara, she stepped forward abruptly, unable to bear the weight of everyone else's silence. "This is being blown out of proportion," she insisted, voice trembling. "He was out of place. I was enforcing policy. Anderson held up a hand. "Miss Crane, now is not the time." She swallowed hard, her lower lip trembled. "I didn't hit him hard," she whispered, as though the softness of the blow mattered more than the act itself. The man sitting in 1C scoffed openly. "You struck a child. That's all anyone needs to know." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the cabin. Dara's breath hitched. Her eyes reddened, but she refused to cry. She had spent years building her reputation, honing a sharp professionalism that helped her rise above many others. Now that image was cracking, and the more she tried to hold it together, the more glaring the cracks became. Anderson stepped forward calmly. Miss Crane, you will be escorted off the aircraft once the situation is stable. I recommend you refrain from further statements until formal review. Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment she looked small, too small for someone who had just minutes earlier tried to command the entire cabin. The plane door opened again. Two more individuals boarded, one wearing a Luma Air Operations badge, the other holding a sealed document packet with a gold crest Mikkel recognized instantly. The Edison Foundation. Amara's breath caught. They're already here. Theo Price stood. Anderson turned. Mr. Price, we've been expecting you. Theo nodded. I assume you've received the preliminary incident report. We have, Anderson said, and we're cooperating fully. Theo glanced down at Mikkel briefly, then back at Anderson. My priority right now is ensuring he remains calm and protected until his mother arrives. At those words, the cabin shifted again. Passengers straightened. Phones angled higher. Even the air felt charged. Mikkel's mother was no ordinary parent. Dr. Arlana Edison's reputation preceded her, known for her brilliance, influence, and ability to dismantle institutional failures with quiet, surgical precision. If she had been alerted, the situation was no longer an internal airline matter. It was a corporate crisis. Anderson seemed to realize this too. We will secure the boy until she arrives at the gate, he said. Theo nodded approvingly. That's the right decision. Officer Raymond addressed the passengers. We ask that you remain seated until further instructions. We appreciate your cooperation. Passengers listened. They didn't argue, not this time, because now they understood. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a small mistake. This was the beginning of a larger reckoning. Mikkel shifted slightly, adjusting the sleeve covering his wristband. Another soft vibration pulsed beneath his fingertips. External command received. Primary guardian en route, prepare for transfer. He exhaled gently, not fearfully, not nervously, just steady. The storm had officially moved outside the cabin, and soon it would arrive at the gate. The air inside Flight L-88 felt heavier now, dense with anticipation. Word of Dr. Arlana Edison's imminent arrival moved through the cabin like an invisible current. Passengers who moments ago watched passively now leaned subtly forward, sensing they were witnessing the early stages of something unprecedented. Something larger than a conflict between a flight attendant and a 10-year-old boy. Mikkel Edison sensed it too. Not through fear, he wasn't afraid, but through a quiet awareness shaped by years of growing up in the orbit of a woman whose decisions echoed through institutions. His mother never overreacted. She never raised her voice, yet every action she took had weight. And Mikkel knew, if she had been alerted, the situation had already shifted into a realm no one on this aircraft fully understood yet. Officer Raymond remained near him, not hovering but maintaining a respectful protective barrier. Anderson, the lead investigator, stood by the aisle reviewing a series of internal logs on his tablet, time-stamped entries showing the escalation, the cabin freeze, the special clearance alerts. Meanwhile, Dara Crane stood stiffly off to the side, her composure crumbling in real time. Her hands shook slightly, her breathing uneven. The enormity of what she had triggered was settling over her, piece by piece. She wasn't simply facing disciplinary action anymore. This was now a corporate-level breach investigation involving a protected minor with institutional connections far beyond her scope of authority. But pride is a stubborn thing. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked under the strain of holding herself together. I've worked here for 25 years, she murmured to Anderson. I've handled emergencies, I've trained crew members, I've been recognized for outstanding service. I made one judgment call, misinterpreted a situation, and now I'm being treated like I assaulted a diplomat. Anderson didn't raise his voice, didn't scold, didn't soften. His professionalism remained intact. Miss Crane, in our system, physical contact with a passenger, especially a minor, is categorized as a serious incident. The investigation will review all factors, but the footage is clear. Your status does not change that. Dara swallowed hard. I didn't know who he was, she insisted again, softer this time. That's exactly the point, Anderson replied. Your duty is the same whether you know or not. Her eyes flickered to Mikkel, small, quiet, composed beyond his age, and for the first time she felt something she had pushed aside earlier. Not defensiveness, not anger, but shame. Amara Calder, still standing at a distance, watched Dara with quiet tension. She had always admired her senior's decisiveness, her certainty. But now she saw those qualities for what they could become when unchecked. Rigidness shaped into cruelty. Amara had stayed silent too long, she realized. She could have interrupted earlier. She could have advocated for the child, but fear had restrained her. And now she stood on the edges of a mistake she didn't commit but couldn't separate herself from entirely. The captain stepped out of the cockpit again, his tone grave. "Security has confirmed Dr. Edison is on the ground," he announced quietly to the front crew. "She'll be boarding through the jet bridge momentarily." The front crew reacted like a gust of wind had blown through them. Dara paled, Amara stiffened, Anderson straightened, Raymond nodded. Theo Price finally stood completely, buttoning his suit jacket. A new level of alertness filled the air. The passengers watched with held breath. The teenage girl tapped her friend's arm urgently. "She's actually coming onto the plane. They're saying she's arriving in minutes." The businessman in 1C muttered, "This is going to make headlines, big ones." Mrs. Loretta Rowe clasped her hands gently, her expression reflecting both worry and admiration. She had seen parents fight for their children before, but never in a moment so steeped in power dynamics and institutional accountability. A soft chime echoed from the front door, indicating manual override from the jet bridge. The cabin door unlocked. Every passenger leaned subconsciously toward the aisle. Footsteps approached, measured, composed, deliberate. Then Dr. Arlana Edison stepped into the cabin. She did not arrive flanked by assistants. She did not rush. She did not raise her voice. She wore a tailored dark coat, her expression calm but sharpened by purpose, her eyes scanning the environment with an almost surgical clarity. Passengers felt the difference immediately. She wasn't loud, but she carried presence. Authority radiated from her in a way that made even the uniformed investigators stand straighter. She didn't acknowledge anyone at first, not the crew, not the passengers, not the security officers. Her gaze moved directly to Mikkel. He stood before anyone could ask him to. The moment she saw his cheek, the faint, swelling mark still visible under the gentle cabin lights, her posture changed almost imperceptibly. Her lips pressed together, not in anger but in something deeper, a quiet, controlled grief that quickly hardened into resolve. She approached him, kneeling slightly so their eyes were level. "Mika," she said softly, using the nickname she reserved for moments when she wanted him to feel safe. "Are you hurt?" "A little," he whispered. She placed a hand gently on his cheek, not touching the bruise directly, but close enough for him to feel her presence. "You handled this with more dignity than they deserved," she said. "I'm proud of you." He nodded, relief flickering subtly across his face. Then she stood. And when she turned to face the adults who had allowed all of this to continue, the temperature in the cabin seemed to drop a degree. "Who," she asked in a calm, controlled voice, "put their hands on my son?" No one answered at first. Even the passengers held their breath. Anderson began to step forward, but he sensed she wasn't asking for a procedural explanation. She wanted accountability. She took one step forward. "I asked a question." Everyone looked at Dara Crane. Dara felt her legs weaken. She swallowed, unable to look away from Dr. Edison's gaze. "I made a mistake," Dara whispered. "A mistake," Dr. Edison said evenly, "is entering the wrong row. A mistake is misreading a seat number. What you did was a violation." Her tone didn't rise, her words didn't shake. Yet every syllable landed with the precision of an accusation sharpened by truth. Dara's eyes filled. "I didn't know." "You didn't need to know," Dr. Edison cut in gently but firmly. "You only needed to treat him like a human being." The passengers murmured softly. Someone whispered, "She's absolutely right." Theo stepped closer, handing Anderson a sealed document. "This contains the preliminary legal filing," he said. "You'll want to review it immediately." Dr. Edison turned toward Anderson next. "I trust," she said, "that your team understands the gravity of what occurred here. You've already indicated cooperation. That will matter in the hours ahead." Anderson nodded with absolute seriousness. "You have our full cooperation, Dr. Edison." "Good," she replied, "because this won't be handled quietly." Then she looked at Mikkel again. "It's time to go." He nodded, gathering his small duffel bag. Theo stepped behind them, forming a subtle protective barrier as they prepared to exit the aircraft. Passengers watched with a mix of empathy, awe, and unease. Even those who hadn't known what was happening now fully understood the magnitude of what had unfolded. As Mikkel walked toward the exit with his mother, his wristband buzzed again. Transfer protocol complete. Guardian present. Incident escalation moving to external review. Behind them, the cabin was silent. Ahead of them, the real consequences were about to begin. The walk down the jet bridge felt unusually long, even though the distance was short. The quiet echo of footsteps, Dr. Arlana Edison's heels clicking in sharp, exact rhythm, Mikkel's soft steps beside hers, and Theo's measured gait just behind. created an atmosphere more suited to a courtroom hallway than an airport corridor. And in a sense, that's exactly what this had become, the prelude to accountability. Outside the aircraft door, a cluster of airport security personnel stood waiting, not hostile, not intrusive, but formally positioned. They stepped aside immediately when they saw Dr. Edison. The respect was instantaneous, almost reflexive. Even those who didn't know her by name recognized her presence. Something about her made people stand straighter, speak softer, and choose their words carefully. "Dr. Edison," the airport operations supervisor greeted, his voice low. "We've prepared a private room for your family. Press has gathered outside the main terminal, but we've restricted access to this area." "Good," she replied without hesitating. "My son needs space, not attention." Mikkel remained close to her side. His duffel bag hung from one hand, his posture steady despite the whirlwind around him. He didn't cling, he didn't hide, but he stayed just close enough to his mother to draw strength from her presence. Theo stepped forward. "We'll need confirmation that the airline's incident response team is assembled," he said to the supervisor. "This matter isn't ending at the gate." "They're already in conference," the supervisor confirmed. "We're coordinating with corporate security now." "Excellent," Theo nodded. They continued walking until they reached a discreet side door leading to a private conference room, clean, modern, shielded from public view. Security officers posted themselves at both ends of the hallway. No one would interrupt this meeting. Inside, the room held a long table, several chairs, a water pitcher, and little else. It was meant for briefings, not comfort. But what mattered was privacy. Dr. Edison guided Mikkel to a seat in the corner, somewhere quiet where the fluorescent lights weren't too bright. She crouched in front of him. "You can sit here," she said gently. "You don't need to speak unless you want to." He nodded. She smoothed the sleeve of his hoodie, a small gesture that conveyed more than words could. Even in crisis, she was still his mother. As she stood and turned to face the door, the controlled composure in her expression sharpened. Her eyes hardened with a calm intensity that signaled she was ready to dissect every misstep, every failure of protocol, every violation of her child's dignity. Moments later, the door opened. Luma Air's internal counsel entered first, a man in a navy suit who looked like he had aged in the last hour. Behind him came the airline's head of operations, 2 corporate security officers, and the VP of customer relations. Nearly all of them looked shaken. "Dr. Edison," the VP said quietly, "on behalf of Luma Air, we want to express." She raised a hand politely, stopping him mid-sentence. "I will hear apologies," she said, "after I see accountability, not before." The VP swallowed. "Understood." Theo took a seat beside her. Anderson and Officer Raymond positioned themselves near the wall, prepared to contribute as necessary. Mikkel stayed silent, his eyes fixed on the table's surface, tracing invisible patterns with his thumb. The airline counsel cleared his throat. "We've reviewed the passenger-captured video and the internal cameras," he said. "There is no question that the lead attendant, Miss Crane, acted outside protocol." "She assaulted my son," Dr. Edison corrected calmly. "Call it what it is, we're not here to soften language." The counsel nodded quickly. "Yes, you're absolutely right." The operations manager stepped forward. "Miss Crane has been removed from active duty pending immediate termination." "Immediate," Dr. Edison repeated. "Good, that's a start." He hesitated. She has also requested to submit a statement." "She will submit one," Dr. Edison said, "but understand this clearly, a statement is not a shield, it is merely documentation." The room went silent. The VP of Customer Relations attempted again. "We want to work with you to determine the best way to address this publicly. We know the footage is spreading rapidly, and we're prepared to issue a formal apology within the hour. We'll also announce—" "Stop." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried an authority that made everyone freeze. "You still don't understand what's unfolding," she continued. "This is not a routine PR incident. This is a breach of protocol involving a child who carries a protected classification you should have been prepared to handle." The head of operations looked down, deeply embarrassed. "You're right, Dr. Edison. We failed. We failed him, and we failed the standards we claim to uphold." Dr. Edison walked slowly to the table, placing her fingertips on its surface as she leaned forward slightly, a posture that balanced restraint and controlled power. "My son," she said quietly, "was humiliated, physically handled, and denied his right to sit in the seat I purchased for him. He followed every instruction. He was polite. He did nothing to provoke what happened." Her voice softened a fraction, though her words stayed sharp. and yet he was treated like an outsider in a place he belonged. The VP nodded. We understand, and we're— You understand now, she cut in. But you didn't understand then, that's the problem. Theo chimed in gently. We will need full documentation from the moment Mikkel's boarding pass was scanned to the moment the flight was frozen. Every internal message, every crew log entry, every gate agent note. And the ground hold directive? Dr. Edison asked. We'll release that as well, the head of operations said. Good, she replied, because transparency will determine how far this escalates. Mikkel shifted slightly. He hadn't looked up yet. His fingers tightened around the edge of the chair as if grounding himself. His mother glanced at him briefly, and he met her eyes with a small, tired look. It wasn't sadness. It was simply the exhaustion of a child who had endured more than he should have. She turned back to the airline executives. Now let's discuss training, policy revisions, and reparations. I'm not here to destroy your airline, but I am here to ensure no child, mine or anyone else's, ever experiences this again. They nodded fiercely, taking notes. Then the VP asked softly, almost pleading, Dr. Edison, will Mikkel be willing to speak publicly, even briefly? Theo stiffened. So did Anderson. Dr. Edison turned slowly toward the VP. Her expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. My son is not your spokesperson, she said. He's not your shield, he's not your PR strategy. The VP froze. His silence is not yours to use, she continued. His dignity is not yours to negotiate. Mikkel listened quietly, his breathing slow, steady. Theo glanced at him and then back to the executives. If he chooses to speak one day, it will be for himself, not for your optics. The VP nodded quickly. Of course, of course. Dr. Edison stepped back toward Mikkel, resting a hand briefly on his shoulder. Mika, she said softly, would you like to go somewhere quieter? He nodded. To the executives, she added, we're not finished, but he comes first. Theo stood, guiding them toward the door. Anderson opened it. Raymond remained positioned outside. As they walked down the hallway again, mother, son, and guardian, security made space for them instantly. And for the first time since boarding the flight, Mikkel exhaled with relief. But the day was far from over. Beyond the private corridor, cameras were gathering. News alerts were firing across the internet. Statements were being drafted. Policies were being rewritten. And the story, his story, was becoming bigger than the cabin, the airline, and even the moment itself. It was becoming a movement. The private corridor leading away from the conference room was unusually quiet, as though someone had intentionally sealed off the noise from the rest of the terminal. Security personnel stood stationed at controlled intervals, their postures rigid and alert, forming a discreet protective path for Dr. Arlana Edison and her son. The further they walked, the farther Mikkel felt from the cramped tension of the aircraft cabin that had become the center of so much unwanted attention. But quiet did not mean calm. Behind the soft hum of ventilation, the world outside was erupting. News outlets had already begun breaking the story. Social media feeds were exploding with clips from the plane, angles, commentary, rewinds, outrage, analysis. Mikkel's face was blurred in some versions, not blurred in others. The bruise on his cheek was unmistakable in all of them. And although he didn't fully grasp the magnitude of online fury, he felt something, like a wave he couldn't see but instinctively understood. Theo walked behind him, speaking quietly into a secure earpiece. Yes, she's with him now. No, she's not granting statements. We'll coordinate once we exit the restricted area. His tone remained calm, but Mikkel knew it was the kind of calm adults used when they were managing a crisis. Dr. Edison, without breaking stride, looked down at her son. Tell me honestly, she said softly. Do you want to leave the airport immediately, or do you want a moment to sit somewhere quiet? Mikkel hesitated. I don't want people staring. Then we'll leave, she replied, as if the decision had never been in question. As they approached the end of the corridor, another figure stood waiting, a woman with a discreet badge clipped to her belt and a tablet in her hand. She straightened as the Edisons approached. Dr. Edison, she said respectfully, we've secured a private exit for you. Ground transportation is ready. Media is blocked from this entire wing of the terminal. Thank you, Dr. Edison said. Is the route completely sealed? Yes, ma'am. Only authorized personnel will have access. Good. They continued through a final set of doors that opened into a secluded loading bay used for high-profile transfers. Dim lighting, polished floors, and a single black SUV parked near the exit. Mikkel paused, his fingers playing with the strap of his duffel bag. Mom, he asked quietly. Yes, am I in trouble? The question hit her harder than anything that had happened on the plane. She knelt in front of him again, hands gently placed on his shoulders. No, no, Mika. You didn't do anything wrong. But she got really mad, he whispered, eyes lowering. I thought maybe I messed up. Her chest tightened. Mika, she said, you followed every instruction. You were calm. You tried to show her the letter. You tried to explain none of this was your fault. He didn't respond immediately. He was processing not the words, but the weight behind them. When he finally nodded, it was small, hesitant, but real. Theo approached with measured steps. Your mother is right, Mikkel. You handled yourself better than many adults would have. What happened reflects on the crew, not on you. Mikkel exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing by just a fraction. Dr. Edison stood again, her composure restored. Theo, any updates from the legal team? He nodded once. They're preparing a coordinated response. The initial footage is already being referenced by commentators, and several civil rights organizations have reached out offering support. Dr. Edison's brow tightened. I thought they might. A soft vibration sounded from her phone, another alert. She glanced at the screen, lips pressing together. What is it? Theo asked quietly. The airline issued their preliminary statement, she said, reading quickly. It's vague, too vague. They refer to it as an unfortunate misunderstanding. Theo's jaw tightened. They're downplaying. They won't be for long, she replied. Not after the footage keeps circulating. Mikkel shifted his weight, looking up at them. What happens now? She crouched back down, forcing herself to soften despite the storm swirling around them. Now, we go home, we rest. The adults will handle everything else. And will she get in trouble? Mikkel asked. Not vindictively, just trying to understand. Yes, Dr. Edison said gently, but not because of you, because of her choices. He nodded slowly. Theo opened the rear passenger door of the SUV. Let's get him settled. The moment Mikkel stepped inside, his body relaxed slightly. The leather seats were cool, the interior quiet, and for the first time since boarding flight L-88, he felt safe in a way that didn't require vigilance. Dr. Edison climbed in beside him. Theo took the front passenger seat. The driver, a trained transport specialist, waited for the signal. Before they pulled out, Dr. Edison turned to Theo. Have you spoken to the foundation? Yes. They're drafting a public statement focusing on child safety, discrimination protocols, and accountability standards. They want to highlight systemic issues without exposing Mikkel directly. Good, she said. He won't become a symbol, not if I can prevent it. But even as she said the words, she knew the story was already spiraling into something beyond her control. Theo unlocked his tablet. There's something else, he said, hesitating for the first time. She looked at him sharply. What is it? He turned the screen so she could see. It was a trending hashtag, one Mikkel didn't understand, but she did. A short phrase with thousands of posts, millions of interactions, and a rapidly escalating global reach. Number protect Mikkel, her stomach tightened. She wasn't surprised, but she wasn't pleased either. Mikkel is not a cause, she murmured. He's a child. We'll manage it, Theo assured. The SUV began to pull away. As the airport receded in the rear window, Mikkel leaned his head slightly against his mother's shoulder. Exhaustion was finally catching up to him. She gently brushed his hair back, letting him close his eyes. In the silence that followed, the weight of the day settled into something unmistakably transformative. The bruise on his cheek would fade, but the impact of what happened on Flight L-88 would not. Dr. Arlana Edison looked out the window, expression calm, eyes sharp, mind already shifting from immediate crisis to long-term consequence. The airline would face scrutiny. Policies would be rewritten. Training programs would be rebuilt. People who had dismissed him would now answer for it. The world had already begun to rally around her son. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was only the beginning. The SUV moved steadily through airport service lanes, leaving behind the chaos that was quickly engulfing the main terminals. Mikkel kept his eyes closed, but he wasn't asleep. His breathing was slow, and even a practiced stillness he had learned over time, how to retreat inward without appearing overwhelmed. Dr. Arlana Edison rested a hand lightly on his shoulder, keeping contact without smothering him. She had always understood the balance he needed. Structure without pressure, support without suffocation. Outside the tinted windows, airport staff watched the vehicle pass, some whispering, some lifting phones, others simply staring with the instinctive curiosity that comes with witnessing something unusual. Though unaware of specifics, they sensed that something significant was unfolding. Inside the SUV, silence lingered until Mikkel finally opened his eyes. "Mom," he asked quietly. "Yes, sweetheart," he hesitated. "Are they mad at me?" Her heart tightened again. No, love, no one is mad at you. They're upset with themselves with what happened, but not with you. But everyone keeps talking about it, he said. Thousands of people. She exhaled softly. His awareness constantly surprised her, not because he was incapable of understanding, but because he often understood more than he expressed. People are talking because they care, she explained. They saw something wrong and they're reacting to it. That doesn't mean you did anything wrong. It means adults have a lot to fix. He fell quiet again, absorbing her words. She could see him trying to reconcile his own calm with the storm outside. Thea turned slightly in the front seat. Mikkel, you handled everything with extraordinary maturity. Most adults would have reacted far differently. Don't blame yourself for their mistakes. Mikkel nodded faintly, but there was still a lingering confusion behind his eyes. The SUV turned onto a private access road leading toward the airport's administrative wing, far from media, crowds, or public exit routes. This would take them to an underground garage where a second, unmarked vehicle awaited to continue their journey discreetly. But as they approached, Dr. Edison's phone vibrated again. Another notification, another update, another wave of consequences rippling outward. She glanced at the screen and her expression changed. Theo noticed instantly. What is it? She turned the phone toward him. A breaking news banner was plastered across her screen. Luma Air CEO releases statement addressing incident involving minor passenger. It was too soon, far too soon. This wasn't a preliminary notice from PR. This was a formal executive-level address. Thea frowned. They're moving aggressively to control the narrative. And without consulting us, she said calmly, which only made the tension more pronounced. That's a mistake. Mikkel looked up. What did they say? She didn't answer right away. She didn't want to overwhelm him. But transparency mattered. He had already been at the center of too much secrecy. She read aloud in a measured tone. We are aware of a deeply regrettable misunderstanding involving a young customer on flight L-88. We are investigating diligently to ensure clarity and accountability while respecting the privacy of those involved. Theo exhaled sharply. There it is. Misunderstanding, twice in one day. They're minimizing, she said, positioning themselves before the facts solidify. The SUV slowed as it approached the private garage entrance. The driver tapped a code into the keypad, and the reinforced gate lifted quietly. Mikkel's voice broke the silence. Why do they keep calling it a misunderstanding? She hit me. The directness of the question caught both adults. Theo turned fully around now, his voice gentle but firm. Because admitting fault openly has legal consequences. They're trying to protect themselves. That's not fair, Mikkel said quietly. No, Arlana agreed, it isn't, but fairness is not what institutions prioritize. That's why we push them. That's why accountability exists. She reached over and adjusted the seat belt near his shoulder. Not because it needed adjusting, but because the closeness reassured him. When adults misuse their authority, she said, there must be consequences, not revenge, not punishment driven by anger, just accountability, the kind people learn from. The SUV pulled into a reserved parking bay beneath the airport. Another black sedan waited nearby, engine idle, windows tinted even darker than the first. Two members of Dr. Edison's Foundation security team approached the vehicle immediately. Dr. Edison, one greeted respectfully, your alternate transport is ready. We've secured an exit through a restricted municipal route. No media presence. Excellent, she said. We won't make further statements today. The second agent stepped closer. Ma'am, may I speak with you briefly? She nodded, stepping aside with him. Mikkel watched her through the open door, reading her posture rather than hearing her words. She stood tall, still and precise, but he sensed the growing tension in her, an internal calculation she was masking from him. Theo leaned down to Mikkel. She's making sure everything is handled properly. Adults say a lot of complicated things, but all of it is to protect you. Mikkel looked down. I didn't mean for all this to happen. Theo shook his head. You didn't cause it. Someone else's actions caused it. But if I'd moved seats, if I didn't say anything, you don't need to bend yourself smaller to make others comfortable, Theo said gently. Not ever. Mikkel absorbed that. It was a truth he needed, but one he had rarely heard phrased so plainly. When Dr. Edison returned, her expression was even more composed than before, controlled but sharper. We're leaving, she said. Let's go. She helped Mikkel out of the SUV and guided him toward the second car. The moment they stepped inside, she adjusted the lighting to its dimmest setting, knowing harsh brightness drained him. As the doors closed and the car began to move, Mikkel finally leaned fully into her side, exhaustion washing over him. She wrapped an arm around him, her jaw tightening with a fierceness hidden behind her calm exterior. In the dim quiet of the vehicle, she spoke softly, but with the steel of someone preparing for battle. "They wanted this to be a misunderstanding," she said. "We will make sure the world sees the truth instead." Theo glanced back, understanding exactly what she meant. This wasn't just about an incident anymore. It wasn't just about a slap, a torn document, or a seat dispute. This had become a case study in systemic failure, one that she would unravel piece by piece. Outside, the city lights flickered against the tinted windows. The world was already reacting, reshaping itself around what had happened. Inside the car, Mikkel finally rested his head on her shoulder, safe but shaken. The fight ahead was an adult's fight, but the reason for it, the heart of it, was sitting quietly in her arms. The city outside the tinted windows passed in a blur, lights smearing into soft streaks of color, buildings rising and falling behind one another like silhouettes in slow motion. Inside the car, however, everything felt still. Contained, heavy. Mikkel rested quietly against his mother's shoulder. His eyes weren't shut completely, but they drifted open and closed with the slow rhythm of exhaustion. After everything that had unfolded on Flight L-88, his small body was finally giving in to fatigue. Dr. Arlana Edison kept her arm around him, her posture straight despite the emotional weight pressing against her. She didn't allow herself to relax. Not yet. The crisis had shifted off the plane, but its echoes were growing louder every minute. The world had already noticed, and she knew the coming days would demand more clarity, more calm, and more precision from her than ever. Theo Price, seated in the front of the car, turned slightly in his seat. "Dr. Edison," he said carefully, "we've received an update from the Foundation. The board wants to meet with you tonight. They're concerned about the rapid spread of the footage." "Of course they are," she replied, her voice low but steady. "A child being mistreated on a commercial flight is one thing. A level alpha minor being assaulted is another. They understand the implications." "They do," Theo agreed, "and they want to coordinate a response that doesn't place unnecessary pressure on Mikkel or on you." She nodded appreciatively. "Good. The focus should be structural change, not spectacle." "Mikkel," Theo added gently, turning more fully toward the backseat, "you won't have to talk to anyone tonight or tomorrow. The Foundation will handle everything." Mikkel nodded faintly, not lifting his head from his mother's shoulder. "Okay." Outside, the car moved from the airport's restricted lanes into quieter service roads winding toward the outskirts of the city. The driver took purposeful turns, routes chosen not for speed but for privacy. This was not a day for risks. Dr. Edison glanced out the window as they passed a highway overpass. Electronic billboards flickered with news headlines and breaking alerts. "Airline incident under investigation. Video of child being struck goes viral. Calls grow for policy reform." The words were vague, but she knew specificity would come soon. Too soon, she looked down at her son again. His breathing had evened out, the rise and fall of his chest steady and warm beneath her arm. He wasn't crying, he never cried easily. But she knew him well enough to recognize distress in other forms, in his silence, in the tightness around his eyes, in the way he curled his fingers slightly as though anchoring himself to something solid. He had been brave, too brave. Bravery should not be required of a child in order to be treated with basic respect. When the car slowed at a red light, she spoke softly. "Mika," she murmured, brushing a loose curl away from his forehead, "you didn't deserve any of what happened today." He blinked slowly. "I know," he said, but the uncertainty in his tone betrayed the words. "It wasn't your job to explain yourself," she continued. "It wasn't your job to prove your seat was yours. It wasn't your job to make an adult comfortable with your presence. You existed. That should have been enough." He shifted slightly, absorbing each word with quiet intention. She gently lifted his chin so he could meet her eyes. "Do you hear me?" "Yes, Mom." "Good," because he needed to understand, needed to internalize the truth before the world's distorted versions tried to take root inside him. Theo glanced back again. "He handled himself exceptionally," he said, addressing both of them. "You should know that, Mika." Mikkel's lips tightened, not a smile, but a small acknowledgement. The car turned onto a tree-lined street leading into a secure residential district. Sensor lights flicked on as they passed. Security gates slid open smoothly. Guards nodded at the identification displayed on the dashboard. As they approached the Edison residence, a modern, angular home built with quiet colors and large windows, another car pulled up behind them, likely carrying Foundation staff who would assist with the logistics ahead. The driver eased the SUV to a stop beneath the covered entrance. "We're home," Dr. Edison said gently. Mikkel opened his eyes fully for the first time in several minutes. The familiarity of the house softened something inside him. Home meant routines, safe spaces, quiet rooms, predictability, all the things he needed to decompress. Theo opened the door for them. Dr. Edison stepped out first, then helped Mikkel down carefully. The cool evening air brushed against his cheeks, and he winced ever so slightly when the breeze touched the tender spot. She noticed. Her expression hardened again, not with anger, but with sorrow mixed with resolve. Inside the house, warm lights illuminated the entryway. A member of staff stepped forward. "Welcome home," she said gently. "I'll prepare something warm for Mika." "Thank you," Dr. Edison replied. But first she led her son to the sitting room, a quiet space with soft chairs and gentle lighting. No television, no noise, just calm. "Sit here a moment," she said, guiding him to a cushioned armchair. He sank into it, pulling his knees up slightly, instinctively curling into a position that soothed him. She knelt beside him again, her presence grounding him in a way nothing else could. "What do you want right now?" she asked softly. He thought for a moment. "Just you. I'm right here." And she stayed exactly where she was, present, patient, anchored, while Theo stepped into the hallway to handle the cascading logistics that awaited them. Phone calls, statements, documentation, legal preparations, media responses. All of that could wait 5 more minutes. Inside this quiet room, one thing mattered, giving Mikkel space to feel safe again. After several long moments of silence, he spoke. "Mom, will it happen again?" Her chest tightened. "No," she said firmly, "because I won't allow it." "How?" "With accountability," she said. "With change, with ensuring that every system meant to protect children actually does. This is bigger than one flight attendant. It's about every person who thinks they can treat a child differently because of how he looks, how he sounds, or how quietly he sits." Mikkel rested his head on her arm again. "Okay," she stroked his hair gently. "You are not invisible," she whispered. "You never were, and today proved that the world sees you and that many people want to protect you." He didn't respond, but she felt the tension leave his small frame. In that moment, she knew something else as well. This wasn't just about justice. It wasn't just about policy reform. It wasn't just about clearing her son's name. It was about changing the conditions that allowed what happened on Flight L-88 to occur at all. And she would do it, not loudly, not theatrically, but with the same precision and integrity she carried into every challenge. Theo stepped back into the room. "The board is ready whenever you are," he said quietly. "But they understand if you need time." She looked at her son, still curled up but finally breathing easily. "I'll join them shortly," she said, "after he's settled." Theo nodded and withdrew again. Dr. Edison placed a soft blanket over Mikkel's legs, smoothing it gently. His eyes, heavy with exhaustion, drifted shut at last. She listened to his breathing, slow, steady, peaceful. And only then, after hours of control, calm, and composure, did she allow her eyes to close for a brief moment. Tomorrow would be difficult. The world would demand answers. Institutions would resist change. People would argue, dissect, and debate. But none of that mattered tonight. Tonight, her son was safe. And tomorrow, she would make certain the rest of the world understood why that mattered.